I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. The Albanese government is preparing to take the United States to the World Trade Organisation if Australia is swept up in Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs later tonight. Australia is anticipating tariffs of up to 20% on all exports to the US, although the government is stressing to industry that there is still enormous uncertainty about the final outcome. So where will we end up? I'll ask the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, live in just a moment. Labor will lobby the minimum wage setting authority to give low-paid workers a pay rise above inflation. The Prime Minister says it won't specify a figure on how much the increase should be. The Coalition says it supports wage increases but will leave the Fair Work Commission to make an independent decision. Opposition Leader Peter Dutton has again refused to say which departments would be affected as part of the Coalition's commitment to cut 41,000 positions from the public service. I'll talk to the National Senator Bridget McKenzie a little later. Well, it's now just hours before we find out if Australia will be included in the United States' sweeping reciprocal tariffs. Now, the ABC has reported today the government is considering taking the US to the World Trade Organisation for breaches of the America-Australia Free Trade Agreement if these are ultimately imposed. The Prime Minister foreshadowed announcements to support affected industries with this comment this morning.
We are certainly prepared tomorrow for whatever outcome is determined, and you'll see that tomorrow.
I spoke to the National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie a short time ago about the looming tariffs and other issues. Bridget McKenzie, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, PK.
If we get slapped with tariffs tomorrow on Liberation Day, will you blame Donald Trump or Anthony Albanese?
Well, I tell you what, you wouldn't want Anthony Albanese in a bar fight, would you? He'd be the guy hiding out in the toilets out the back until it was all over. This guy can't pick up the phone to the President. We have an ambassador that doesn't have the access that we had the last time this came around, and unfortunately, we aren't in the position that we want to be in. Our red meat industry alone, it was a $5 billion export industry to the US in 2024. And we want to make sure that we keep that access and that our primary producers and our manufacturers can continue to export without tariffs. So I guess the question is, have we got an exemption? We obviously are standing with the government wanting to see one, but these things just don't miraculously happen. And at the moment, I'm underwhelmed by the Prime Minister's inability to have a direct conversation with the President of the United States about this issue. OK,
you mentioned a bar fight. Are you suggesting that Peter Dutton would be better in that bar fight with Donald Trump?
I'll let your viewers decide, PK.
At the end of the day, you're pitching him as leader and you're suggesting that he would be more effective, but I'm trying to work out what the evidence for that is.
We've got Chinese warships and spy ships circumnavigating our country. The Prime Minister would prefer they're not there. He sends letters, he sends missives, but he absolutely doesn't take actual action. We're going through a cost of living crisis, another example. His budget, instead of providing immediate relief to Australians, gives them 70 cents a day in 15 months' time. They need relief right now, which is what we under Peter Dutton have promised in our budget in reply, with slashing the fuel tax on the day we come to government. So that is actually practical action.
But even
doing actual actions that make a difference rather than these weak missives and requests, polite requests that Albanese seems
But even as we've
so careful to
talked
provide
about this, your focus has been on the Prime Minister. Isn't it Donald Trump that's waging what is international trade war on, well, lots of nations, including potentially us? Isn't it his responsibility?
Well, of course, this is an issue for the United States, and if the United States chooses to put tariffs on everybody that's exporting to the US, that is going to damage global trade. We know that. The liberalised world sought to remove tariffs as much and as often as we could. It's brought peace, it's brought prosperity over many decades. We're a trading nation. We obviously need to have a liberalised trade environment. Donald Trump and his administration is making decisions about what he believes is in the best interests of the USA. We, under the coalition, want to see what's best for Australia, and that is for tariffs not to be applied to our exports. It's that simple. Should
Australia take the US to the World Trade Organisation over tariffs if we are to be hit with them?
Well, it was the National Party's John McEwen who got anti-dumping provisions written into the World Trade framework back in the Kennedy rounds of negotiations in the 60s, and they've served countries like us, middle powers who are exporting nations, very well when having to buttress our national interest against those bigger trading nations such as the EU bloc, the USA and the like. And we've used them to great effect. I remember an anti-dumping case we looked at with Italian tomatoes with my SPC Admona in my home state of Victoria. So those provisions that the National Party or the Country Party before it got written in have been very good for us as a country. And we've had to use them recently when we were in government.
Right, so you think it is worth using them if it was to come to that?
Well, I think we should use every method we have available to us to protect our national interest, and obviously the coalition would support the government in doing that.
On the public service, can I just get some clarity? So is it all by attrition that these 40,000 jobs will go?
Well, PK, what we've made very clear is that the additional public servants that the Labor government has put on the books, we will be actually looking to shed those jobs if we are successful at the next election, because we want to see outcomes from the public service and not just additional jobs being paid for by taxpayers. Now, if I'm in a small business here in Brisbane, I'm actually having to ensure that every single person on my payroll is actually making sure our business is productive so we can keep everyone on the payroll. And it doesn't seem to have that same level of oversight and careful management under a Labor government in Canberra. That's what we're concerned about, that everyday taxpayers are paying for more public servants to be employed and less public service being actually given in terms of outcomes in our communities. That's what we want to see. It's that simple. It's quite a pragmatic response to the use of taxpayers' money.
But Education Department's been mentioned. There aren't that many jobs in the Education Department. Do you think the Education Department, the Health Department should also be subjected to cuts?
What I want to see is better outcomes from the Education Department and the Health Department. And if you have put on additional staff in the 3 years that you've been in government and there haven't been improvements in service delivery, then I think you legitimately have to ask the question on behalf of Australian taxpayers, what is the benefit? And if there is no benefit to the community or the provision of services in the education and health departments, then what are those extra people for, and why are the Australian taxpayer having to pay for them?
So you think that you could remove staff and get better results for the public?
I think the question we legitimately are asking and laying bare, shall we say, at this election with this commitment is, if you are going to put on tens of thousands of public servants, then there must be some benefit to the public in terms of better running of services, more kilometres of road built, more train stations, whatever that may be, better results in our education, testing, etc. So we need to see better outcomes from those public service jobs being provided, and we haven't seen it, Patricia. I can't think of one arm of government where the numbers have gone up in terms of service delivery and the outcomes have gotten better, whether it's Indigenous affairs, education, health, road funding, road deaths, the standard of living of Australians, also in the toilet. So on any level, I can't find it. So if you've got one, tell me.
No, I'm not
tell
so
me
much
what
going
it
to
is.
provide it, but I'm going to ask this logical question. Is cutting the staff going to all of a sudden give you those better results, though?
Well, what it will actually do, Patricia, is save money in the budget where we can actually direct those hard-earned taxpayer dollars to areas that will provide practical benefits for Australians. That's what we're interested in providing. We don't make a secret about that. It's the big difference between the Labor Party and the Coalition, that we're interested in making sure Canberra works for the Australian public rather than Australia works for the public service to grow. And that's the difference. That's the proposition and that's the choice for the Australian public.
Just on the schools and the education stuff that's been talked about in the last couple of days, how are kids being indoctrinated in schools? Like, in what way is it Indigenous, gender, sexuality? Like, what's causing the fear or the anxiety?
Well, I think when you talk to parents, when you talk to students at our universities, which are funded out of the federal budget, when you talk to mums and dads sending their kids to school, the issues they're raising are the increasing level of violence. You talk to teachers about that as well in the classroom. So it is about the social enculturation of our children within those classrooms. When you go into university campuses, you have got an acquiescence, if you like, of anti-Semitism, where Jewish students, Jewish academics, Jewish research projects that are associated with Israel are under attack. That is an ideological attack, and people aren't safe. So there's a whole raft of issues.
I mean, like, you send your kid to a primary school or a high school in Australia, where's the indoctrination?
Well, I'm an ex-chalky myself, and the sense of responsibility as a teacher, no matter what age child you are actually teaching, is very serious. What you say as a teacher within the classroom, the types of information you give your students, the types of information and opinions you choose not to share with your students, is important. And increasingly what we've been seeing in the classroom is that certain ideas and perspectives are privileged over other ideas or contradictory ideas.
This is what I'm trying to get to the heart of. Like, what are they?
Well, I can go to a personal example of my own family, where students were actually not encouraged to bring certain political commentary into the classroom for discussion in an English class because it was deemed as anti-climate change or anti-environment. Now, I would have thought we want to have our students leaving high school with all the basic knowledge and skill sets they need to live a rich and rewarding life in this country, to be good citizens, great neighbours, fabulous parents and community members, but also to be critical thinkers. And I think that's even more important with the rise of social media. So if you are only privileging certain types of information, certain perspectives, then you are narrowing the critical thinking skills and development of our young people, and that is what's happening in our classrooms,
but there
and
is
that is why parents are concerned about it. It's not happening in every classroom, Patricia.
But there is a consensus on climate change, isn't there?
I also was a lecturer in education at university, at Monash University, and again, there is a particular political bent within those classes that privileges certain ways of thinking, certain ways of teaching over others. That is the reality. And what we want to see is kids leaving school with the skills they need and with open minds and a wide breadth of opinion and discourse available to them so they can make their own minds up about how they choose to live their life and the things that they see as right and wrong.
We're out of time. I know you've got to get to another appointment. Thanks for joining us.
See you on the trail.
See ya. With the chaos in Washington, D.C. and the Trump administration's looming trade assault, Australia's ties with other democracies and key partners are only becoming more important. The UK's High Commissioner Vicky Trudell, who is about to finish her term in Australia, spoke to our Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts.
Well, High Commissioner, thanks very much for speaking to the ABC.
It's great to be here, Stephen.
Now, it's been an extraordinary 2 months, I think you'd agree, in Washington, D.C. Both Australia and the UK are grappling with an awful lot of global upheaval and a radically different strategic landscape. There are even mumblings or murmurs in Canberra about the viability of things like Five Eyes and AUKUS, although that hasn't come into the mainstream of government policy making yet. Well, how do you see it? Does Australia need to, or does the UK and Australia need to go back to the drawing board, or do you believe those long-term abiding principles between the US, the UK and Australia will be sustained through the Trump administration?
We have absolute confidence that it will be sustained, and with all our Five Eyes partners, including Canada and New Zealand as well. This has stood all our countries in good stead, and I would argue not just our countries, but the greater good that we have collectively done together ever since the end of the Second World War. I mean, that history, that experience has transcended lots of different administrations across all our countries, in good and in bad times. The strategic importance, what we do share on balance, matters far more than where we may have momentary differences. So I think we all just have to lean in. And any relationship needs to adapt and needs to evolve, needs to have currency and relevance. It is incumbent on all of us to rehearse and refresh that contemporary relevance. And where you started from, in what appears to be a more contested world where there are increasing challenges, this relationship, these relationships matter all the more.
Are these differences momentary, though? Because there are some who are arguing this is a radically different US presidency, certainly like nothing we've seen since World War II. Are those common foundations, respect for democracy, non-aggression, do they still truly undergird these relationships?
We believe that they must do, and we will wait and see how things evolve. And as I said, this is where diplomacy matters all the more, the quiet diplomacy behind the scenes, because if we're serious about ensuring all our security, all our economic interests, and continuing to work as we have done in the past, but the important elements of that continuing into the future, we have to be calm, we have to be pragmatic, and we have to respond in an appropriate way.
Does some of this uncertainty, in a strange way, drive countries like the UK and Australia closer together as two fellow democracies facing a radically different US?
Well, I think our two countries, Australia and the United Kingdom, have always been close. And if I reflect on my time here, we have really strengthened and extended the foundations of the fundamentals of our relationship. So we find ourselves at a time when our relationship has never been stronger, has never been deeper, has never been broader. And at this point in time, we realise the added value of being two of the three AUKUS partners, where for both Australia and the United Kingdom, the United States is our #1 security and defence partner. So we have common cause in working together on our relationship with the United States, because the geostrategic importance of something like AUKUS or the Five Eyes intelligence sharing relationship has never been more important.
Obviously, everyone is now waiting for the US president's announcement tomorrow morning, our time, on tariffs. There have been murmurs that the UK has been trying to strike a deal with the US ahead of that announcement, although it doesn't sound like it's been successful. Australia has also not managed to strike a deal ahead of time and is now waiting, like all of us, with bated breath. Australia is really scrambling here to come up with a solution. One idea that's been floated just today is potentially taking the US to the WTO. As another country that's very trade exposed, that has deep ties with the United States, do you think that's something the UK might look at? What sort of response can the UK roll out in the face of this?
Look, we all know that President Trump is a deal maker. And the art of negotiating is that you don't give up till the final moment when you know whether or not you've got a deal. And even if at that timetable or deadline you haven't, you keep negotiating, you go back. So for us, I go back to the point that I made. We know the reality of the new administration in America. We all have to work with the grain, and we have to show what our offer is and the reason why. If we're looking for a reduction on tariffs, there is a really good argument of the importance of the economic relationship with America and for them with us. So we will work right up to the final hour to see what the outcome is. And until we know what that initial outcome is, we should also look at what has happened in recent months, where other countries thought they were on the brink, only to find that there was a resolution and an opening and a different pathway forward to the one everyone was convinced would be the way forward.
All right. Well, just finally, High Commissioner, you're departing Australia after, is it 4 or 5 years?
It's longer than that,
it's
Stephen.
Even longer, High Commissioner.
It'll be precisely 6 years and 1 month, making me the longest-serving British High Commissioner in history to Australia.
Well, that's quite a stint. Have you got any final reflections? Is there anything about life in Canberra that's surprised you, or about Australia that's surprised you?
I think one of the things that I have found surprising is how many Australians do not understand your own constitution, and within that, that you are a realm in your own right. And when the King visits, he does not do so as the British King, but as yours, and indeed that the British High Commission and British High Commissioner have nothing to do with his visit programme.
An observation earned from hard experience. High Commissioner, thanks for speaking to the ABC, and congratulations on your posting.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Well, one of the biggest fights this election is over supermarkets, with both parties pledging to find ways to stop unfair pricing at the checkout. Ask anybody. It is honestly the thing that people complain about almost overwhelmingly. Now, Craig Emerson is a former Labor MP, former minister in the Rudd-Gillard governments. He authored the independent review of the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct last year, which recommended the code become mandatory, among other changes. Those changes went into effect yesterday, and Craig's our guest this afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Patricia.
We'll start there, and then I need to pick your brain about a couple of other things.
Sure.
Your review into the supermarkets resulted in a code of conduct that went into effect yesterday. Do you think that will be enough to actually, start dealing with bad practice and lowering prices?
To be clear, my review dealt with the relationship between the supermarkets and their suppliers, not the supermarkets and their customers. And I did find some pretty ordinary behaviour, to be diplomatic about it, and therefore recommended a voluntary code of conduct that came into force in 2015 be made mandatory and toughened. In addition to that, though, I also recommended that the government look at issues such as whether planning and zoning laws favoured incumbents, so that the possibility of the entry of other supermarket chains, really from overseas, had been strangled in some way or another. And that's also what the government has done, as well as picking up the recommendations, in fact all of the recommendations of my review.
Were you surprised that the ACCC did not find sustained evidence of price gouging?
No, I wasn't really surprised. There is evidence. I think one of the sort of more, if you like, sneaky areas is probably shrinkflation, where something might cost $2.50 for 100 ounces, and then it gets reduced to 80 ounces and it still costs $2.50. Well, the price has gone up effectively, and so that was something that the ACCC did find was quite prevalent.
The Labor announced a new policy over the weekend, which is seems to be a committee that's going to look at this sort of thing. Is that really going to get prices down, Craig Emerson?
Well, it's, all you can do is what is within your powers. We could have a Soviet system where you say, OK, the price of Sayo biscuits will be $1, the price of Kellogg's cornflakes will be $1.20. That didn't work out too well in the Soviet Union. So we do have people arguing that the government should set the prices of hundreds and hundreds and, in fact, thousands of items every day. Sounds like a good idea until you drill into it just a little bit. It didn't work in the Soviet Union, would not work in Australia.
OK. Let's move on to what looks like a trade war we might be somehow involved in. And the US Liberation Day is looming. We don't seem to have any exemptions coming. There's been a lot of talk about what we might be hit by. How do you think Australia should respond?
Well, we don't know the extent of any tariffs that will be put on Australia beyond aluminium and steel, which has already been announced. I can say that the US is not a major customer of Australia. We've diversified, going all the way back to the Hawke and Keating years, really, our trade customer base, and China and East Asia are very big, and the US is not. So no one wants in Australia tariffs to go on their products. Certainly don't want them going on products like high quality beef and so on. But in terms of the macro effect, it probably wouldn't be huge. The big macro effect would be to the extent that it slows down economic activity globally, and in particular in relation to China. Now, I don't know what China will do, but I would not be shocked if China said, well, we'll step in and stimulate our economy, which, in a century plan economy you can do. If they did that, then we could come out OK. OK,
and so there's been a lot of discussion about the way we should deal with the Trump administration. Just a moment ago, I had Bridget McKenzie on, who said that, would you trust Anthony Albanese in a bar fight? That was kind of an analogy she used in relation to dealing with Trump. The Liberals are suggesting that Peter Dutton is more capable in that forum. What's your reflection on how to manage this man and the political contest we're having in Australia over this?
Well, I wouldn't spend, too many waking hours on it. Mr. Trump will do what Mr. Trump wants to do. I think that's pretty evident. But I do think that Peter Dutton, inadvertently perhaps, is looking a little bit like Donald Trump with his Department of Government Efficiency, exactly the same name as the Elon Musk creation in the US. And that probably is worrying people, that he's going to make lots of cuts here in Australia. So if I were Peter Dutton, I'd be trying to distance myself from Donald Trump rather than emulate him.
Don't you think he is on some things?
Is on some things what?
Distancing himself. I mean, he's saying he's going to stand up to Donald Trump on this. I'm just putting the sort of counter point that Labor, the coalition has been arguing, that they have been standing up on things like tariffs. Well,
what have they done? I mean, I think Peter Dutton has actually gone the soft path and probably picked up in published polling that is not the way to go, because the everyday Australians are really quite frightened about Donald Trump and his team. And if I were Peter Dutton, I would be trying to distance myself. I think that's actually, to pick up your point, what they're trying to do now. But it's been an uh-oh moment because they've been emulating the sorts of cuts that Peter Dutton has been talking about. I'll give you an example. Working from home. Well, what's so terrible about working from home? Well, apparently it is really bad. And Peter Dutton doesn't like working from home. This sounds Trumpian to me. So he can say words, but if he's emulating the policies of Trump, well, that's what people will take a notice of, rather than, a couple of tough words here and there. That's my view anyway. Yeah, and Labor is now suggesting that there's going to be widespread cuts. The coalition's saying they'll look at attrition. It's just about making sure that the public service, they think it's ballooned under Labor and it's too big.
Labor says it's cuts to health and education. Can they carry that argument?
I think so, because the numbers are that the increase in the number of public servants in Canberra has been about 7,000, and Peter Dutton and his team have said they're going to cut 41,000.
Well, the increase has been 41,000.
In Canberra, I said.
Oh, yeah, you did.
Yes, that's
so you're
right.
saying the other jobs are in other parts.
7 from 11 is 4. That's 34,000 outside of Canberra. And, you know, people know outside of Canberra and inside, but I'm talking about outside, that these people are involved in direct service delivery. They don't go into the office every day and just, you know, get on the keyboard and do a bit of Googling. I mean, they deliver service. People know them. And by the way, in those regional centres, they buy stuff. They buy food. They go to cafes. You know, they participate in sporting life. And so, anyway, it's up to Peter Dutton, but I think it's a mistake.
You think it's a mistake. This election, though, has become a really interesting contest. Now, we should launch you now. You're soon going to be a regular panellist on the show. We are going to team you up with someone who will unveil soon once they get their final...
It'll be our little secret.
They're getting their final approvals. We'll have you on regularly to talk about politics. But we're nearly at the end of week one. So your assessment of how the two leaders have gone. Clearly, you do have a Labor bias. That is quite obvious. You worked for Bob Hawke. You were a minister in Labor governments. How have you seen the first week?
I think there's been an absence of momentum on the part of Peter Dutton. Not a loss of it, but an absence. It's like he's been spinning his wheels to date. It's a long time, these campaigns, you know, and I've certainly worked with Bob Hawke on the 87 and 1990 campaigns. They're absolutely wasted by the end of them, physically and mentally. But it's as if he's been spinning his wheels. Albanese has been releasing policies, so has Peter. But when Peter's asked about the detail of the policies, he's more likely to say, oh, that'll come out later. Well, we are running out of time, notwithstanding that there's 4 more weeks. So he'll have to, I think, gain some momentum, because the stories that you and all of your colleagues in the media tell are about a slump in the polls, and that makes people on the coalition side anxious. And once there's that anxiety, you don't end up having a very good campaign, because they start speaking out. I think Albanese is going pretty well, and you'd say, oh, well, he would say that, but they have been releasing policies, and it just looks steadier to me.
Interesting. All right, look forward to launching you on the panel. Craig Emerson, I've talked to you for many years. Always enjoy it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Patricia.
Anthony Albanese stood up this morning and spruiked the government's submission to the Fair Work Commission. He defended not specifying a figure and says they want any wage rise to be economically sustainable.
We have never put figures on our submissions, but what we put is an indication to the Fair Work Commission that is independent of government, our view of what is important. So obviously they will take into account what the economic circumstances are in this, but it's very clear we want a real wage increase, but of course we want it to be economically sustainable.
Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor spoke at the National Press Club after and says the coalition supports real wage increases, all while using a prop.
We want higher wages, but most of all we want higher real wages. I'm going to show you all a chart. I'm an old management consultant. I can't help myself. That side is the employee living cost index since Labor's come to power. That's how much living costs have gone up for the typical working family in Australia, that red bar. That blue bar is how much wages have gone up. We don't want that to go down. We want that one to go down.
Now, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, is in Longreach. That's in Western Queensland, and as hopefully you've heard in our news, that's where residents are facing evacuation amid rising floodwaters. The Treasurer joins us. Treasurer, welcome.
Thanks very much, Patricia.
You're in the middle of the flood zone. Just give me a sense of the situation on the ground where you are.
Well, today, along with Jenny McAllister and Anthony Chisholm, we visited Quilpie in Western Queensland and now Longreach. And behind me, you get a bit of a sense of the very substantial flooding that we're seeing, and really a huge part of Australia. Already, the count for lost livestock is about 145,000 sheep and cows which have been lost, but we expect that number to be much, much higher than that. And that's why we're here today. We're speaking to local mayors, whether it's Tony Rayner here in Longreach or Ben Hall in Quilpie earlier on. We've also announced today with the Queensland Government that we are providing primary producer grants of up to $75,000. And that's because a lot of the farmers here, a lot of the primary producers have lost sheep and cattle and goats. A lot of them have lost equipment. And so we're working closely with the Queensland State Government to provide that help while people are dealing with what is pretty devastating conditions here in Western Queensland.
Yeah, very much hearts out to people living in that situation right now, and thank you for giving us an update. Let's get to some of the daily politics if we can, Treasurer. The opposition leader has declared he would have a fight with Donald Trump or any other world leader to advance Australia's interests. At the same time, Labor has suggested that essentially that he is kind of a Trump light, and that's been your sustained attack against him. Doge Dutton is what you called him yesterday, but he says he's prepared to have a fight with Donald Trump.
Oh, I think it's self-evident now that Peter Dutton takes his cues, takes his instructions and takes his policies from the United States. It's very dogy what he's been saying about cuts to health, cuts to education, cracking down on work from home. All of these policies are more or less straight from the Doge playbook. And so I think we're well within our rights to point that out, because every time Peter Dutton proposes a policy which is straight from the US, it's a policy that would make Australians worse off. And there's a lot about Australia that we should be protecting and advancing. You know, we don't want to see the Americanisation of our health system. We don't want to see the strengths of our pharmaceutical benefit scheme traded away. And that's why we support Australian policies when it comes to strengthening Medicare, when it comes to strengthening the PBS and making medicines cheaper, when it comes to biosecurity. These are all the non-negotiables. No matter what Peter Dutton says from time to time as we await this announcement out of Washington, DC, I think it's become really, really clear, not just in recent days, but in recent months, if not recent years, that a lot of what he's talking about is about importing American policies to Australia, and that would make Australians worse off as a consequence.
OK, so if we are slapped with tariffs on Liberation Day, we wake up to this news whatever time it breaks, what is the Australian response? Because you might be in caretaker mode, but you're still the government. What do? Is it an angry phone call to Donald Trump? What does standing up for Australia look like?
Well, a couple of important things about that, Patricia. I mean, first of all, if we are impacted by these next rounds of tariffs, we won't be uniquely impacted by them in the same way that we weren't uniquely impacted by the steel and aluminium tariffs. It's something that's been applied and imposed on the rest of the world. We think in self-defeating ways. We've made that clear as well. Our job is to make sure that in the face of all of these escalating trade tensions and all of this global economic uncertainty, that we make our economy even more resilient, which was a big theme of the budget, and also that we make sure that we make our export markets even more diverse. And the Prime Minister was talking about this morning. I think Craig Emerson, the former Trade Minister, might have touched on this a moment ago when he was speaking with you. In the face of these escalating trade tensions, we will do everything we can to make our export markets more diverse, to make our economy more resilient, to stand up for and speak up for the things which make us Australian, like Medicare, like the PBS, like our strong biosecurity arrangements. They will be our priorities. Whether or not the decision out of DC, whatever the decision that's announced out of DC in the next 12 to 24 hours looks like.
Why don't we know yet? Like, don't we have good enough relations, given we are meant to be such good mates as nations, that we're getting the heads up? Like, what's happening?
Well, first of all, I mean, we have been engaging with the Americans for some time now at many levels, including many ministerial levels. Penny Wong, Don Farrell, the Prime Minister, myself and others have been engaging with the US. I think every country in the world now is hanging on the decision that will be announced out of DC before long. I think everybody recognises that at the end of the day it's a decision for President Trump to make and announce, we've made our views really clear about the self-defeating, self-harming, self-sabotaging nature of tariffs, which just make goods more expensive in the country that levies those tariffs. It makes no economic sense for the Americans to be going down this path. We've made that clear. Our priority throughout has been to stand up for and speak up for Australia's national interest, including our national economic interest. This validates and vindicates the efforts that we've put into our economy over the last few years to make it more resilient, whether it's our Future Made in Australia agenda, whether it's the way we've been investing in and stabilising relations, trade relations closer to home in our own region. This is all about making ourselves more resilient in the face of these escalating tensions.
Do you want to take the United States to the World Trade Organization if they do slap tariffs on us tomorrow?
Oh, look, obviously I've seen the report that you're referring to, that your question comes from. I don't want to preempt the Prime Minister's response or the government's response, except to say, as I have, where our focus will lie on resilience, diversification. This is our strategy. We've said on earlier occasions that we believe in going for resilience rather than retaliation, but I don't want to preempt the government's response beyond that, just as the Prime Minister didn't want to preempt that earlier today.
But are they going to feel, if I can just be blunt, and I think I'm channeling many Australians and how they might be feeling.
You can be blunt, Patricia, it's your show.
Thank you, Jim. Are we going to make them feel any pain? Is there going to be a response to the US, or are we kind of going to shrug our shoulders and move on? How are we going to register our sense of dismay and anger at a potential tariff being slapped on our country?
Well, first of all, I think in the aftermath of those steel and aluminium tariffs, I think the Prime Minister was very strong in making our view extremely clear. That levying tariffs on allies and friends is not the behaviour is not how friends treat each other. I think that was the way that the Prime Minister has put it on earlier occasions. Of course, we will respond once the announcement is made by President Trump. But I think I've given you a good sense of where our priorities lie: resilience, diversification. These are the things that will matter most in the face of these escalating trade tensions.
And will you be talking to your counterpart? Have you sought conversations with him? Obviously, you went to the United States and met with him. Have there been follow-ups?
Well, look, obviously we engage at every level. You know, not every day, but at every level with our counterparts. You're right to identify the fact I went over there to speak with Secretary Bessent, but also to Director Hassett about some of these issues. The Ambassador's been putting our views. Ministers have been putting our views, and that's been important. As I keep saying, Patricia, the most important thing is that we speak up for and stand up for Australia's interests. We have a strategy, a long-standing strategy to make our economy more resilient, our markets more diverse, and that's what will matter most in the face of these escalating tensions.
Just on what we might do for our own industries, will there be compensation or industry assistance for our own affected industries? Have you been working on that?
Well, I think you saw in the budget billions of dollars in investment in areas like green metals, in areas like innovation, in areas like recapitalising the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. There are a number of investments made in the budget which are about making our economy more resilient. That's been a big theme of the last 3 years, and what we're seeing around the world, all of this global uncertainty, again, really kind of vindicates and validates that strategy. Our Future Made in Australia strategy is very important. Beyond that, I'm not going to preempt future decisions. I'm not going to preempt the way that the Prime Minister will respond once we know the announcement out of Washington, D.C. We are well placed and we are well prepared as Australians in the face of these escalating trade tensions, and that's because we have already been putting effort into making our economy more resilient and our markets more diverse.
You have been focusing, and you did at the start of the interview, on the Coalition's plans. The Coalition government has said it may reprioritise funding in education and health where waste has been identified. Peter Dutton's talked about even the ABC. He says excellence should be funded, but beyond that, there should be efficiency. So obviously, they do plan to have a look, under the bonnet when they get elected, so to speak, if I can use that cliche. Can't believe it came out of my mouth, but you know what I mean. That's what they've said.
I do.
But they say it won't be frontline services. there still will be funding. So what is the argument over then? I mean, you're not in favour of inefficiency, are you?
Well, first of all, they're lying about not touching frontline services. You can't cut 41,000 jobs without touching frontline services. That's the first point. The second point is Angus Taylor had an hour on his feet at the National Press Club today. He won't debate me there, but he showed up there today. He had an hour on his feet and he had an opportunity to come clean on these cuts, these secret cuts that he will need to pay for $600 billion worth of nuclear reactors, and he was either unable or unwilling to do that. There is an agenda of secret cuts here. It will make Australians worse off. It will attack frontline services. And they have spoken about coming after health and education funding. We've seen that in the last couple of days. And so I think Peter Dutton and Angus Taylor pose a very, very big risk. After an hour on his feet at the National Press Club, the only thing that is clear is that Labor is going to the election with an agenda for higher wages and lower taxes. The Coalition's going to the election with an agenda for lower wages and higher taxes.
They
will increase taxes on every single one of the 14 million Australian taxpayers.
Today they backed the Fair Work.
They did it with caveats, Patricia.
Okay.
No, Peter Dutton did it with caveats and asterisks. There's always a but when it comes to wages. And Peter Dutton, we know from their form, they've opposed our efforts to increase the minimum wage. Because of our efforts, we've supported $7,500 increase to the minimum wage since we've been in office. That's been despite the Coalition, not because of the Coalition. There's always an asterisk, there's always a but, there's always a caveat. From Labor, you'll get higher wages and lower taxes. From the Coalition, you'll get lower wages and higher taxes, and that's clearer now than ever.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you, Treasurer.
Thanks, Patricia.
The war in the Middle East is set to play a part in this election campaign. One pro-Palestinian protest group, Stand for Palestine, has vowed to heckle and disrupt politicians if and when they visit mosques and places of worship. Dr Jamal Rifi is a community leader in Sydney's West and joins me now. Dr Rifi, welcome.
Thank you, Patricia.
You've warned people in your community that punishing Labor over support for Israel will get a Liberal government elected, and you believe their policy is unsympathetic to the issues that you care about. But clearly people are very, very disappointed and want to express that. Do you think they're listening to you?
I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks they will listen to me, because we don't want to pile disappointment on disappointment. Without any doubt, people have the right to be angry, frustrated, but they shouldn't forget that this current government, in the first term and early days, they have actually reversed a previous Liberal government decision to declare Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to cut the UNRWA funding. They reversed it, and they did even more. Recently, they voted for the United Nations, for the Palestinian state to have a full membership. They fell short of recognition of the state of Palestine, but in Australia, only a government, a cabinet will make that decision, not a vote in our parliament. And people should be aware of the difference that will impact on Australian Muslim in Australia and also on the causes of the Palestinian. They have, I believe they paid over $70 million for humanitarian aid for the Palestinian. They have called for a ceasefire, while the other lot, they have not called for a ceasefire, and they are going to invite the Prime Minister of Australia if they get into Parliament, and they are going to review the role of the Islamophobia envoy, but they're not going to review the anti-Semitism envoy. I was hoping that we don't have to go that far, and I was hoping that Peter Dutton would send the right message to the Australian Muslims community, rather than inflaming the tension and causing divisions between the way he look at other Australian and at the Muslim community in Australia.
Well, he visited a mosque over the weekend. He has been reaching out, it seems to me, from looking at his movements. to the Islamic community. Are you heartened to see him make those attempts?
Look, as any potential Prime Minister, he should do a lot more towards all sections of the community, not just the Muslims community. But unfortunately, in the past, he should have done it well before now. He visited Wiriwa, where he has a candidate, and that candidate is supported by the Muslim vote because they have refused to run a candidate in that area because they are going to give the Liberal candidate an advantage over the Labour. There are things at play with talking about before always and supporting one side of the community against the other. I reckon he should build bridges between all. It's good what he has done. He is a Prime Minister in waiting, but he should do a lot more than that.
Do you think either party is dealing with Islamophobia? I mean, we started this interview with me mentioning that Labor politicians may be heckled. We've seen that there's been some heckling, I think, of a Liberal frontbencher as well, a video that was doing the rounds in the last couple of days. Clearly, the community is trying to express their anger. What are they responding to?
Without any doubt, they have all the right to express their anger at the ballot box, not on the street, and not in such a way, because the tension is palpable in southwestern Sydney, and also the rhetoric is very polarised in the Australian communities at large, and we needed to actually cool down, and we need to follow the political protest. The way it's done with political systems, you're going to get a protest. Don't protest just on the street, protest in the ballot box, but don't do it in a mob mentality. Don't use any smear campaign. Use correct information. And unfortunately, we have seen a lot of misinformation and disinformation. And it doesn't sound good for us because we all are angry. We all are suffering. But I believe people in Australia, they should not use the suffering that happened in Gaza and the anger that exists in our community to divide us from the rest of society.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, to get a handle on where this election campaign is at, almost a week in, Prime Minister called it Friday morning, so we're nearly there. I want to bring in my panel, former Labor advisor Ryan Lidell and Ian Hanke is a former advisor in the Howard government. Welcome to both of you.
Good afternoon, Patricia. Ryan.
So we are 5 days in. I'll start with you, Ian, as your new panellist on the show. Who has the upper hand?
Look, at this moment, I'm seeing a lot of newspaper reports saying, Mr. Dutton's sort of bit wobbly and whatnot. But I was talking to a friend of mine today and who's also been experienced in campaigning, and he basically said, what we're seeing at the moment is a bit like the phony war in World War II. After the great retreat from Dunkirk, suddenly nothing happened. And that's the way the campaign is a bit at the moment. People aren't paying much attention, and I don't think they will until we get closer in. We've got the school holidays, we've got Easter, we've got Anzac Day. So I think real attention is going to focus closer to the election because of all the events that are between now and it. But at this moment, I think, there's no two ways. There was a little bit of a wobble yesterday, for example, with the advancing for Mr. Dutton. But in this great scheme of things, I don't see too much in this.
Ryan, how do you see it?
I think there's no doubt that the Prime Minister's come out of the blocks in a sort of a stronger position than Peter Dutton. I think the opposition leaders I think Ian's been quite kind, saying there's a few wobbles, looked very shaky from the outside. I'd take the point it's obviously going to be a long campaign, but I think there's so many opportunities to get your message across to punters. People aren't sitting there glued to television 9 to 5 like political pundits like us are. So you only get so many opportunities to do that. And to Ian's point, if you find yourself standing in a winery an hour away from an infrastructure announcement that you're supposed to be making, wondering what on earth's going on, then maybe things aren't going particularly well for you, as we saw with Peter Dutton yesterday.
Now, Ian...
I think these are recoverable.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a big deal.
All right, tomorrow, though, is a big day. We will maybe be slapped by tariffs. The way we respond will be interesting. Ian, I know you're not a great fan of the Trump approach to trade and the way that they're handling this. How do the leaders have to respond if we are slapped with tariffs? And what's the pressure on Peter Dutton?
Look, well, first of all, Peter is not the Prime Minister yet, so most of the weight of that decision will fall on the current government. But I think the best approach would be a fairly united approach with this. There's can't be too much of a gap between the opposition leader and the Prime Minister on this. And I think the government and the opposition will take a strong line on this and won't resile from perhaps forcefully putting Australia's position. I mean, there's a lot at stake here, more so than the steel and the aluminium. There's a lot at stake, and so I think there'll be a very forceful position put forward by both sides tomorrow.
I spoke to the Treasurer a little earlier, Ryan, and he's kind of calling the opposition leader Doge Dutton. He's trying to build up... you can see why he's doing that, because there is politics to extract there. What's Labor's strategy here?
It's interesting, well, before we get to Labor's strategy, Patricia, it's interesting looking at the journey of Peter Dutton when it comes to Donald Trump. When Donald Trump was elected, Peter Dutton did a press conference calling the ideas man. They were auctioning off, MAGA caps at Peter Dutton fundraisers in Canberra. That when word of the tariffs first sort of came out of the US, Peter Dutton was blasting Anthony Albanese, saying it was all his fault. Now he's saying he wants to be on Team Australia. So that journey has gone a very, very long way since President Trump was sort of sworn in. I think you'll see.
Ryan,
I'll let you finish your sentence, Ryan,
sorry.
and then no, that's all right, Ian. Just finish your sentence, Ryan. Yeah.
I think what you'll find is, to Ian's point, I think you'll find quite a calm and measured sort of response from the government, where one of 164 countries that are expecting tariffs to sort of be hit tomorrow. There's been that constant engagement from Ambassador Rudd through to the Trump administration, from Trade Minister Farrell across to his counterparts, and from the Australian government across to the wider Trump administration there. So that engagement's there, but I think there's a recognition across the community that we are one of a huge number of countries that are facing similar things tomorrow.
Ian?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when Trump got in, and I'm no fan of Trump, don't misunderstand me, I don't think anybody around the world quite expected to see what's unfolded over the past 60, 90 days at all. And I think it has caught a lot of people by surprise. And I think people are making reassessments across the board about the American administration. And that's right. As events change, you've got to change your perceptions. And I think that is the case with Mr. Dutton.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, although we've only got 2 minutes left. Ian, I do wonder why everyone was so surprised. He kind of told us he wanted to do all this. Why are we all so surprised? I'm not that surprised.
Well, I think leaders around the world were surprised because they thought it was just rhetoric. I don't think they really believed the extent of what President Trump was going to do, and it did catch the world by surprise. It caught the Europeans by surprise. It caught the Canadians, the Mexicans, and it's certainly catching the Greenlanders by surprise.
Yes.
Around the world, there is a lot of gobsmacked leaders.
That's a good way to describe it. Ryan, I'll give you the last 30 seconds on the show. Were you surprised?
Just really quickly, I think there are a few people that probably regret some of the initial enthusiasm for President Trump, i.e. Michaelia Cash early in February said, you know, with Peter Dutton, you'd have the exact same attitude as you'd have from Donald Trump. So I think there are a few people sort of eating their words over the since that happened. But then, you know, to Jim's point earlier, we're seeing some of the similar sort of policies over here in relation to Doge. So let's see how that plays out in this campaign.
OK, all right. We can't contest that right now, but Ian says it's rubbish and the Liberals do contest it. We're out of time. Thanks, guys.
No? Yeah. OK. Cheers.
And that's afternoon briefing for today. Stay with us here on ABC News. Joe O'Brien is up next with today's other top stories as well. Afternoon briefing lives on iView and YouTube, so you can just search afternoon briefing and catch up with some of our really interesting interviews this afternoon. We spoke to the Treasurer, we spoke to Bridget McKenzie. You got all of your political news for the afternoon in the election campaign. I'll see you tomorrow. Catch you then.